Hello and welcome everyone to our winter alumni town hall. We are just 21 days away from the end of 2020, and I, for one, would like to offer a big cheers to the new year. While we deeply miss the opportunity to welcome you back to campus, we're delighted that so many of you have chosen to extend your Zoom day to join us here tonight. These alumni town halls have been born out of the pandemic, but they've become a really wonderful way to hear from our alumni community and to share news about the college. So I thank you for joining us this evening. Tonight, we'll hear an update from President Decatur on the semester and plans for the spring. And then, since we're ready to talk about something other than COVID, he's also going to present to us on some information gleaned from a recent housing study. We're also joined by current student Ever Crowfoot Swade, class of 2023. Ever chairs the Housing and Dining Committee on Student Council, and she was part of that campus housing committee as well. Tom Giblin, Associate Professor of Physics and Chair of the Faculty, is also here tonight, and he'll offer some insight on the semester from the perspective of the faculty. And we're also pleased to welcome Marilyn Shields, class of 2000, and the chair of our Kenyon Fund Executive Committee. And she will share a little bit more about the volunteer input into the college's next strategic plan. Then, of course, we'll have time for your questions. So we've got a lot to cover tonight in just 1 hour, and we want to be sure we have time for your questions. As a reminder, you're on mute to enhance the audio quality for all of our guests, but if you'd like to submit a question, please do so in the chat to submit questions, and we'll get to as many of your questions as we can. So now it's my pleasure to hand things off to our president, Sean Decatur.
And thank you, Colleen, and welcome. Thanks to all of you for taking time out of your schedules to join us this evening. Happy Hanukkah to those who celebrate, and happy holiday season, happy end to 2020 to everyone. For me, the biggest news of the past week is that the fall semester is winding down. We are in the last day of reading period. Finals will be happening next week. And most of our students left campus to end the residential part of the semester at Thanksgiving break. And so students have been completing the last week of classes and will be completing finals with remote study. Overall, the fall semester actually went incredibly well given the circumstances. Kind of as a reminder, we had first years and sophomores in residence on campus, juniors and seniors studying remotely. And the goal of that was so that we could de-densify the residence halls and give everyone a single room in an attempt to reduce campus density overall, and also have a better sense of managing shared spaces such as Pierce and de-densifying classrooms across campus. We had a program of regular testing of students and as well as testing of employees, and of course, rules on campus about face coverings and distancing and minimizing social gatherings, and generally a goal of keeping folks within the Kenyon bubble. I think this was a year in which the traditional, what folks think of as the bubble around Gambier, was more valuable than ever, as we tried to keep people on campus and interacting within a community that was safe. And I'd say that the end, our students and our campus community overall just were truly extraordinary in embracing the spirit of not only just compliance with the public health guidelines, but the spirit that this compliance was important for keeping everyone else healthy and safe. And so, we ended the year with fewer than 10 student cases on student positive results on campus, and generally, I think a good spirit among the students that are on campus. We are Looking ahead to spring semester will have a later start this year. We'll be starting the first day of classes on February 1st. And part of that idea is to shift everything a little bit later to maximize the number of good weather days in the spring semester, recognizing that outdoor gathering and outdoor life in general is better in a COVID environment. And some of you may recall that January and February are not necessarily the best outdoor moments in Gambier. And so moving the start date back from early January to early February gives us a little bit more room in the spring semester for days that we're outdoor, we can take advantage of the outdoors. We will be bringing back 3 classes of students in the spring, so sophomores, juniors, and seniors. And we've worked out that everyone in a traditional residence hall will still have a single. We do think that at this stage, that's important for us in terms of just reducing density and minimizing some of the possible points of transmission. Students who are in apartments, however, will be potentially in either a double or a single. The logic behind that, and one of the things we discovered this semester, is that the departments really are sort of self-contained pods, because there's so much shared space within an apartment that everyone, and these are typically 6 to 8 students, are kind of in a family unit pod similar to a family unit in a house. And so we'll be treating them in that manner. So at this stage, I'm actually feeling very optimistic about how the campus will navigate the spring. And I'm sure Professor Giblin will talk about this a little bit later, but I think our faculty also did a tremendous job in being able to pivot to multiple forms of instruction, teaching in person, in distance classrooms under a range of different conditions. And so we were teaching in under tents, we were teaching in spaces that were pretty spread out, as well as teaching remotely and teaching hybrid courses that had combinations of students in person and remote. And so the work that went in over the summer to pivot the modes of instruction, I think, really paid off this semester. In non-COVID things, because some work has gone on campus that has not been related to COVID over the course of the past semester as well. One of the neat things about this year is we are hosting a virtual residency of the theater company Theater of War, which was founded by Kenyon alum Brian Dories. Theater of War does readings of classical plays and then leads community discussions about how those plays resonate with the particular issues that a community may be struggling with, or particular issues of our time. This past weekend, there was a reading of Book of Job that involved professional actors, including Bill Murray, but also folks from the local community, including the mayor of Mount Vernon, Matt Starr, who is also an actor. And the idea was to use the Book of Job as a launching place for talking about how communities are approaching both the pandemic and social disruption of the past year, and what's the role of faith and different faith traditions in looking at this issue. And so it was a great panel discussion of folks from Kenyon, folks from the local community, from multiple faith traditions, talking about or responding to how the Book of Job connects to their views of navigating the year 2020, or at least what the current year has been like. And I think a great example both of how we are trying to create virtual community during this year in which building the traditional type of community on campus is challenging, but also how we are trying to come up with great ways to connect the Kenyon community to the surrounding Knox County community and generate interesting dialogue between those sectors. And so it was really, I think, a terrific event, and I hope some of you had a chance to tune in. There will be more Theater of War productions online looking ahead to spring semester. The West Quad project has continued along. And in fact, just in the past 30 hours or so, the construction wall that some of you on your last visit to campus may have seen has come down. So you can actually see the library from Middle Path in a kind of a nearly unobstructed view. There are still mounds of dirt that need to be flattened, but it is getting there in terms of a good view of what Chalmers Library will look like from Middle Path. We are on track for Chalmers Library to open in April this spring. And for the new admissions building, which is also rapidly taking shape, if you have a chance to look at the webcam online to follow the construction, the admissions building definitely looks like a building now. And that building is on track to be open in the late summer, so looking at next August. And so we're really delighted that progress on the West Quad has been able to continue throughout the tumult of this year. We've also been spending time this year looking on a longer time range about Kenyon. As some of you may have heard in prior town hall discussions, we've launched a strategic planning process this year to be able to set priorities for Kenyon going beyond the year 2020, which was the year ending of our last strategic plan, but looking towards the bicentennial and beyond, being particularly sensitive to the fact that the pandemic has introduced a great deal of disruption, not only to the broader economy, but to the higher education sector in general, and thinking about setting priorities in the context of how we best position Kenyon for success as we look ahead to Kenyon's third century. There's a committee of trustees and faculty and students and staff that have begun meeting about the strategic plan. There have been conversations held on campus, well, in the Zoom space of campus with faculty groups and staff groups and students and others, as well as beginning to reach out to alums and parents for feedback. You'll be hearing more about the strategic plan as it evolves, moving into the spring. The goal is to have this process complete by the end of this academic year. So looking ahead to May of this year. And then finally, I wanted to talk about the topic that Colleen introduced just a few minutes ago, and it's related to strategic planning, and that is we've also been doing a close look at housing on campus. One of the big take-home lessons that I think we should capture from the impact of COVID on our campus is that it's really emphasized that the residential experience is central to the Kenyon experience. Whereas I think that we've done a good job in pivoting to building remote community and to having remote instruction, that there is something that's really important about bringing people together on this hill in Gambier. And what we've heard from both our current students and also prospective students is that people recognize the value of coming to live in residence on a campus now more than ever. Our residence halls have been an area of the campus infrastructure that's needed attention for some time. And actually before the pandemic, the board authorized the college to move forward with a study of housing. And so we have, over the course of the past year, we engaged a consulting firm, Brailsford and Dunleavy, who did both a study of the physical infrastructure of housing, so just assessing what the conditions are of various housing stock around campus, as well as doing surveys and focus groups with students. This work started in January, but actually continued throughout, even while students were remote. One of the things we can feel good about is that the response from our students, which was very high to the surveys and strong participation in the focus groups, something that Brailsford and Dunleavy said they really didn't see on other campuses, that Kenyon students are really engaged and wanting to give their feedback on these questions. And just at a very high level, the report of this was just finished about a month ago. Some of the things that we learned is that students are very interested in improved housing, especially on South Campus, that is a place where, if you sort of think of South Campus versus North Campus housing, that feeling that South Campus housing is a place that needs some attention. The sense is that the more variation in terms of suites and apartments are desirable that those are desirable housing for students, and we don't have enough of those, according to our students. That interestingly, and this will probably resonate with alums here, but laundry facilities and better layout of where laundry facilities are relative to where students live, so that there is not as much trekking of laundry across Middle Path, especially during January and February. And an interesting thing that as we look towards renovation and working on our housing, to be conscious of energy conservation and environmental sustainability as we work on the standards of the housing stock. So we're in the process of digesting the information from both the study of the physical infrastructure of housing, from the feedback from students, and will be over the course of the next couple of months developing a plan for how we can implement a strategy for upgrading the housing infrastructure on campus. So that's the quick round of updates from campus, and I'm sure we will have more discussion later on. But again, thank you all for joining in.
Thanks very much, Sean. We will return to many of those subjects, but let's start now with the conclusion of the fall semester. And Tom, this of course was your first year as chair of the faculty. So could you describe a little bit about how both remote and in-person teaching went for you and your colleagues?
Thanks, Colleen. And good evening, everybody. Thank you for taking time to come out and talk with us. As a physics professor, I'm not used to seeing this many people willingly hearing me say something. So I wonder if I should probably bring up quantum mechanics or something. I mean, I am in the exact spot where I teach quantum mechanics, so I think it's probably appropriate. So I do want to tell you a little bit about how things have been going here with respect to how we're teaching now. And I guess it probably won't come as a surprise to you, especially if you visited Kenyon, since you graduated. Kenyon teaching is always changing, right? When we learn something about how to learn, or when we learn something about how to teach, my colleagues and I are pretty enthusiastic about putting it into practice. Now, that's not to say we were looking forward to what's happened. And in fact, for those of you who were still students in the spring, you'll remember that the quick pivot from from in-person instruction to primarily or almost completely virtual instruction was hard, right? It was something that was a big challenge for us, especially as we tried to grapple with all of the stresses that were around us. But we asked you to do many, many hard things while you were students here. And we did that with ourselves this summer. And we looked in the mirror and said, we have a hard thing to do, right? We have to take all of the priorities we have as Kenyon educators, and we need to be able to deliver those Kenyon experiences to a whole new set of people, a quarter of which have never even been Kenyon students before. And I think if you were to walk around campus, which of course is explicitly forbidden according to our Kenyon Pact right now, but if you were able to walk around campus, what you would find is that so much has changed, right? Even courses that are taking place in person have so many modifications associated with them that your biochemistry laboratory won't look a lot like your biochemistry laboratory, except of course probably the facial protective gear. But yet we were able to maintain and learn from the best research on how to deliver courses in this environment. My colleagues spent a lot of time chopping up their time, for example, and providing, working with smaller groups of students in innovative ways. It was one of the things that we knew we had to do, was to make sure to connect with each and every student. And so many of us found ourselves, let's see, my last tutorial yesterday was at 8 p.m., right? So meeting with 14 different groups of 3 to 4 students every week, just to make sure that we had that personal connection. Some of my colleagues, would do those same things in person. We made videos. We did all sorts of things to try to bridge that gap and try to make Kenyon something new. And actually, I will say we've learned something from it. We've learned about what at the core are the things that help people to learn. And I think that we'll see when this is over that a lot of these a lot of the tools that we've picked up during this pandemic will actually help us to do another paradigm in how Kenyon teaches. So that is not to say I'm excited about being in person and seeing students again and eating pizza with people, but as for right now, I've never been more proud to be a member of a group of people as I am to be a member of this faculty.
That is all great to hear. Thanks, Tom. I think it's clear to our audience that the faculty just went to extraordinary lengths this semester to make sure that you were making connections with our students. So congratulations for making it through. Let's get the student perspective in here. Ever, I'd love to hear you just reflect a little bit about your experience, what worked, what didn't work. Tell us about your semester.
Thank you, Colleen. So as a community advisor and as a current sophomore, I'm kind of able to speak to both the freshman experience tangentially and the sophomore experience, which are evidently two different things. At the beginning of the year, as I heard from several freshmen, the freshmen were really struggling because they couldn't make those same connections that you could on the average year at all safely, right? And they were following the rules, so they couldn't make those connections. But something that the Office of Student Engagement did, which was really successful, was they started doing daily kind of activities. There were days when the Office of Student Engagement team would like drive in a little purple car and deliver prizes or candy, or they'd stand outside of Pierce and just give you candy and free beanies. So there started this trend of doing an activity every day. Pick up tie-dye kits was one of them. And the freshmen started to be able to feel more connected to the community as soon as they felt there was this daily activity going on. So at the beginning of the year, the freshmen were really struggling, but that was fixed a little bit by the end. In terms of a sophomore, I think I had a great semester. You know, I already had my friend group. I could meet them both on Zoom and in person when it wasn't a quiet period. Of course, there were negatives, right? Like if it was a quiet period, I couldn't see my friends really in person unless it was good weather and we could sit outside, which is disquieting if you're all within 10 feet of each other somewhere on campus. But everything went as well as it could have given the circumstances. And as an economics major, I'm also a tutor with the MSSC. And something that worked, I think, well for students, but not necessarily from teachers in my experience, was the hybrid teaching model. So I had to hybrid tutor students. I would have students come in person and I'd teach them econ, but I'd also have students on Zoom. And I was scrambling back and forth. So that was something that I think students really benefited from, but could be tough for the person teaching in a hybrid fashion. I'm super excited for spring. I get to go back, very happy, very thankful, and excited to see my friends again, of course, safely and social distanced.
Terrific. Ever, let me stay with you for a minute, if I may. I referenced at the opening of our hour that you also, in your capacity on Student Council, served on the Housing Study Committee. And if I understand it correctly, you yourself have actually lived on North Campus. So can you say a few words about both your experience of participating in the study and then just why we think students are so excited about living on South Campus?
Yes, so I've exclusively lived on North Campus because I am a community advisor. So I've lived in freshman dorms for all my experience so far and will for the next year or so. And I definitely think the draw of South Campus is proximity to Pierce, right? That is the social hub really of the school. That is where you get all your food. So having that quick walk to Pierce is something students really benefit from, in addition to a very quick walk to most of their academic classes, right? So that's how my friends have seen their semester at South Campus. Most of the housing study results I felt were very connected to what I saw as what could be improved around campus. My friends, the approval of apartments, more apartments, was something everyone I talked to spoke about. So it seemed like the trends that students believed were inputted into the survey quite effectively, which is of course due to the high response rate, right? So students were able to respond, and then of course their opinions got heard because they did that.
Great, thank you, Ever. As we talk about student residences, Sean hinted at the beginning that this is of course related to some of the strategic planning questions that we're looking at and looking ahead for Kenyon. And just last week, we were fortunate to have more than 50 alumni volunteers participate in one of the strategic planning sessions and offer their insights. So Marilyn, I know you were one of those alumni volunteer leaders who participated. Could you share a little bit about what some of the themes were that emerged from your group about Kenyon, say 5 to 10 years from now?
Sure. And I happen to be in President Decatur's group, so he's a great facilitator. And we were given two questions to grapple with. First, what makes Kenyon Kenyon? What's the Kenyon-y stuff that we all across generations have come to know and love as Kenyon? And what would that look like 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now? And what we came to were all the things that if we did this again right now, I think we get a lot of the same responses. What makes Kenyon Kenyon? It's small, the sense of community, right? How do we create that? Well, part of it's the rural setting that we have, right? We're not in New York, we're not in a suburb. So you're kind of stuck getting to know the people that are right there because there's not other options necessarily. I'm sure Mark Vernon's great, but you know what I mean. Class size, right? The ability to develop deep connections with professors, delve into those classes. In fact, there was a Twitter question not too long ago, what was your favorite course at Kenyon? And to every response I saw, it was one of those small classes like Quest for Justice. And I'll just reference Quest for Justice because it's a small class where you get a lot of that conversation and ability to exchange with other people. They talked about campus size, residential setting, which President Decatur referenced earlier. We also talked about the general liberal arts education, right? No one really wanted to see Kenyon kind of morph into a technical college where we started focusing on specific vocations as opposed to really teaching students how to think, how to problem solve, how to write generally, which can have applications across many different positions and careers. But Sean kind of helped us think about, well, okay, small setting, community, what does that look like if Kenyon has 1,700 students versus 2,000 versus 2,500 students? Does that fundamentally alter the Kenyon experience in some way? And the takeaway, and we only had a short period of time, was not necessarily, right? If Kenyon were to be a little larger, that could potentially still work, and we'd have to think about how you get there. But if the class size is still small and you still have those opportunities for engagement, that could still work. And I think that's important thinking that the strategic planning committee is doing as we think about things like the enrollment cliff that's coming, which I'm sure some of you have thought about or talked about in your lives. And we're kind of thinking about what are the ways that we get there. Do we start looking at maybe a more year-round program? Do we lean into some of the things we've learned about virtual education and what is possible with a larger student body over a longer period of time? And I know I was only supposed to talk for a couple minutes, I'm sorry. And then one more thing I wanted to point out to this group was we also talked about a little bit, or I talked about the fact that all the things that we really love about Kenyon, the rural setting, the small classes, that we can lean into and really love, that develop sense of community, can also be the things that make Kenyon a little more difficult for diverse students. And how do we think about that as the Kenyon continues to work towards a more diverse student body, and how do we support those students as well? So it was a very good, very robust conversation. I was able to stay awake, and it was well past my bedtime, and I'm more than happy to expand on that and answer any questions that you might have.
Terrific. Thank you, Marilyn. I suspect that many of those themes that you've mentioned resonated with members of our audience that are here tonight. As a reminder, if you'd like to submit a question, please do so in the chat to direct it to submit question. But let me turn now to some of those that we received in advance. And I'll start with one that came from Jan Richardson, class of 1985, who referenced the friendships that are formed in more traditional dorm settings because of shared hallways and lounge areas. And she's wondering why our future plans are looking more at apartment style suites. So to take that question, I'm happy to introduce Meredith Harper Bonham, class of 92, who is our VP for Student Affairs. Meredith, I asked for you to take it because of course you were so important to the housing study. And then maybe after you comment on that, Ever, we could have you weigh in as well. So first, Meredith.
Happy to, Colleen, and greetings everyone and happy Hanukkah. We really thought very carefully about the student development continuum as part of the housing study. And that means that we wanted to incorporate opportunities for first-year students to build community, and then gradually get to a point where by student senior year, they were getting ready to transition to life after Kenyon and pursue more independent living environment. And so that really provided a strong foundation for the creation of more apartment style living on campus, particularly for seniors and perhaps for some lucky juniors as well who might obtain those apartments through the housing lottery. But Jan, I completely take your point. It is so critical for students to, and Ever referenced this as well, the challenges that I think some of our first year students encountered this fall because of our incredibly unusual pandemic circumstances. In order to, but it's so important for students to really gather and get to know one another and learn how to live together. I can say as a Kenyon alum, my closest and dearest friends from my time at Kenyon were those who I lived on the first floor of Mather with. So I feel this very personally, as well as understanding on a professional level, what it means for our students.
I really don't think I have much to add. I agree, especially with Meredith, that dorm housing is very important for the freshman and sophomore experience because you are making new friends through that medium, and you have to learn how to live with each other. But I do know several juniors and seniors who've already kind of formed their friend groups and they want to get closer to those groups through more independent living, and have an opportunity to feel more like an adult on this especially rural campus. So I agree with everything Meredith said.
Well, thank you both. Our next question comes from Allison Black, class of 91, who asks, what is Kenyon currently doing to plan for commencement? And how many different scenarios are being explored? So Sean, would you like to take that one?
Sure, and I say right now, it feels like, countless near infinite number of scenarios are being considered. I think our top priority is to, and our I shouldn't say top priority, maybe it's the thing we aspire to and would desire is to have an in-person commencement this year. And, we and our events team has been planning out what that could look like and how we could do that with distancing and what it would mean to have a safe in-person event. Some of what might make that possible or not possible is of course beyond our control, and it depends on the state of the pandemic and the ability to travel and what that looks like as we move into the spring. And so we are also planning remote possibilities as well as some potential hybrids in between those. So we would like to have something in person, outdoors and distanced would be great. But stay tuned as we go into the new year and we have a bit more information about what things are looking like.
Fingers crossed. Thank you, Sean. Our next question is from Karina Harding, class of 1990 and parent of a student at class of 2022, who references the current polarization in our country and asks what Kenyon is doing to encourage and ensure that there is a balance of student and faculty who hold different political views. So Sean, maybe we'll stay with you, but then Tom, if you want to weigh in, that would be great as well.
Sure, and the deep and intense political polarization is being felt everywhere, and certainly Kenyon is no different. We are aiming to, and it certainly is, I think, essential to the mission of Kenyon as a place where you learn by interacting with people who have different views, and you hear different viewpoints, and you have the opportunity to debate different viewpoints, that's something that is critical to who we are. And the fact that that's getting eroded more broadly in society is something that's of concern to us as well. There are a few things we've been doing to work on this front. One is our Center for Study of American Democracy, which does extensive programming over the course of the year. This year that's shifted to virtual, but when we are in person, does extensive in-person programming over the course of the year to make sure that we have on a regular basis events that are not only nonpartisan, but are looking at important issues of the day from a range of political perspectives, and to make sure that we're bringing voices to campus on a regular basis that are from a range of political perspectives. In conversations among the faculty, and I'd say especially our faculty in political science, but I think this is broadly felt across campus, that there's a sense of wanting to use the classroom as a model for what engaging complex ideas from different perspectives is like. And so the material itself becomes something where you can engage in an issue that is relevant to the day, but not in a way that is proselytizing a particular perspective, but that is getting students to engage the idea from different perspectives. The place where I think we have some work to do, and it's something we are just continually working on and reflecting on, is what this means for the student experience, and recognizing that outside of the classroom, there really needs, our students need support and practice in how to engage each other in issues that are difficult and challenging and controversial, without feeling either themselves that they need to shut themselves down in what their views might be, or that they need to be constantly on the defensive about their ideas or their perspectives or their points of view. We started a program last year with our ombudsperson in doing having students who go through a peer training program and how to help to facilitate difficult dialogue on campus. And that's a program that we have been trying to expand and continue even in the virtual world. We had also started COVID, some sponsored lunches and dinners to get people who have different political perspectives to come together to share a meal in a conversation, to sort of, again, recreate or create that opportunity to talk about difficult topics or difficult ideas as they move forward. And there are a couple of student organizations that have sprung up that are dedicated to trying to promote this on campus as well, including having weekly sessions, and those sessions have been online this semester, where there's a topic put out there, and the idea is to really bring people together from a range of perspectives to talk about a topic. And so I think this is an important part of what Kenyon should do, and we're trying to do that both in formal programming and work in the classroom, and also in work with student organizations as well.
If I'm allowed to follow up for just a moment, Colleen, I'm glad that that Sean didn't take my analogy, because following a molecular biochemist, I thought he would surely talk about polarization of molecules as they come from external electric fields. And I begin there only because polarization, of course, is a thing that happens when external fields are physically separating things, right? And when we think about political discourse, and maybe I'll appeal to the math majors here, we think about graph theories and social networks. So much of our conversations on a national level have become fractured and separated due to external pressures. So from a faculty perspective, we actually began very early this semester in trying to find out what we can do as a principled organization. Right? We have a mission statement that tells us to live lives of purpose and consequence, and we wanted to make sure that Kenyon was an example for people in their lives to think about fighting polarization by actually coming together and having conversations. And so the faculty set up a working group that was that was representative of some departments on campus, as well as CSAD and all of the different interest groups that were promoting voting and political issues in one way or another. And we set up what was called the Voting Access Coordination Committee, which started what we called Kenyon Votes. I think David Hoyt is on in the room here somewhere, was an instrumental member of that committee, along with a number of other administrators, faculty, and lots of students. And that echo chamber actually led us to what early data indicates is the sort of highest level of civic engagement among our students and faculty that we've had in a long time. So I think having voices that may not have participated in the conversation as a middle ground, right, to bring these two things together and to cancel out some of those electric fields that are pulling our molecules apart.
Tom, my thesis advisor would be horrified that I missed an opportunity to talk about the Stark effect, and so I'm glad you brought it up.
Ever, anything you'd like to add on this topic before I go to the next question?
I don't think I have much to add, no.
Okay, thank you. Okay, the next one, Sean, I'll address to you. The question is from Jake Griffin Rosenberg, class of 2016, who asks, when will the college be voluntarily recognizing the Student Workers Union?
No, and just as some context, there's a group of students who have made a request for a student worker union for the college to voluntarily recognize a student worker union. In response to that, the Board of Trustees formed a special committee to look at the issue and to look at the issue of work on campus. That committee has been studying and meeting quite a bit over the course of the past 2 months. I know its work is actually wrapping up very soon, so there should be word on that very soon.
Great, thank you, Sean. Okay, from Kelsey Rendhawa, I'm sorry, I probably butchered your name. The question is, what are practices from the college's response to COVID and remote and hybrid learning modalities that you want to carry forward post-pandemic? In essence, how is Kenyon leveraging new opportunities created by this situation? So, Tom, would you like to kick us off with that one?
Sure. I'll reflect a little bit on what I mentioned before. In the, we've done so much work as a group of faculty this year, going back to principles, right? What's important? How do we learn? How do we teach? And what that kept coming back to was relationships, right? That the interaction of students with each other, and the interactions of students with faculty, and faculty with faculty, are the ways those conversations are critical to how we develop new pathways and how we learn things through conversation. I would say that one of the things that a very concrete example of something that I'm sure we're going to stick with is separating the idea of ingesting knowledge with the idea of digesting knowledge. And you've been through this, right? Because when you sit back in a chair and you watch a presentation or someone writing on a chalkboard, that experience for you as a student is one that for which the location isn't of utmost importance. And so many instructors have thought about that period of ingesting information to move that outside the classroom. So to videotape, or I guess they're not videotapes, but to record digitally our lectures and to have them available to students to watch and rewatch. And then to really focus on this precious time that we have with our students, whether it's in person, socially distanced, or whether it's online, or whether it's in a small conference room, but to spend that time really digesting the information. And understanding that period of digesting is the precious one, and one that we missed when we didn't have it or weren't able to plan for it in the spring. That separation is one that I think really will stick with us. And I also think we've become much more aware of some of the challenges that many of us face For example, reading a paper on a screen is very different from reading it when it's printed out, or being able to listen to a 50-minute lecture, or to be able to break it up into 4 smaller chunks. You know, we're learning about how can we make some of our learning or some of our teaching flexible enough that students who engage in different ways are able to engage in those different ways. Basically, there's a lot of individuality that's been going on, but I think, just to wrap up, I think at the heart of it all, though, are those relationships. And when we get back together, I think we're going to see a lot of 2 and 3 people working with a faculty member and having a deep discussion. Maybe fewer chalkboards, although don't get rid of my chalkboards. But but I think we're going to see a migration to really embracing those relationships and how they help us learn.
Thank you, Tom. We received a question from Ann Young-Gerlach, class of '82, who asks about Kenyon's endowment and wonders why it is considered small compared to some of our peer schools. So Sean, would you like to answer that one?
Sure. And if you look at certainly many of the schools with whom Kenyon competes for admissions, some of our what we call cross applications, so students who apply to Kenyon and apply to these other schools as well. Our endowment, which right now is about 400 million plus or minus a little bit, is significantly smaller. And so if you look at Grinnell, which is somewhere around 1.5 billion, Denison down the road, which is at about 700 to 800 million, Oberlin is about 800 million. Many of the schools out east are $1 billion or up. A few hit the $2 billion front. We are significantly smaller, and that does have an impact. If you think of roughly, schools typically spend about 5% of endowment, of earnings of endowment, that's equivalent to about 5% per year. And so the difference between 5% of 400 million and 5% of 2.5 billion is a lot in real dollars of what it means for, and that is a lot in terms of financial aid and scholarship support of students. Historically, Kenyon, if you dial back 50 to 60 years ago, was not only in a more difficult financial position, it was also a school that in its early days focused a lot on the seminary and teachers, and actually not a lot on fundraising as a general matter, of course. And so we went into to the late 60s and early 1970s with a very small endowment and a very small base of alums, because we were a very small all-male school at that time. Since then, actually, the college has caught up substantially, both in terms of alumni support and donor support for the endowment, and actually also market growth of the endowment. But that differential at the period 50 to 60 years ago between Kenyon and other schools was a smaller differential in absolute dollars, but of course all of those other schools have had market growth as well, and have actually grown faster and larger than Kenyon has been able to grow, because we had a smaller principal amount to begin with. So it's interesting in terms of growth. Kenyon has done quite well over the course of the past few decades, but that's been, it's like we started a bit late to the race, and that initial piece takes a while to catch up.
Well said. Thank you, Sean. Our next question comes from Janet Burns-Smith, who wonders what will happen to, quote, the ethos houses, as she calls them, Edelston, Timberlake, Horvitz, O'Connor, and Sites, once the West Quad is complete. And of course, then she adds, please don't say they'll be torn down. So, Sean?
No, so they certainly are not being torn down. They will house academic departments again as we move in a next phase of the work to do work on Ascension. Ascension, to both do some renovations of Ascension and to make Ascension more accessible, we're going to have to de-densify Ascension Hall and move some departments out. It actually turns out those houses are actually probably better suited for some of the smaller departments that are in Ascension. So for example, classics would actually fit very nicely in one house, whereas right now they're housing departments like history and political science that end up being spread over 2 or 3 of those houses. So the next 5 years, there will be a lot of shuffling around, but those houses will not be torn down, and they will actually still be academic spaces.
Thank you. Meredith, I think the next question should be directed to you. Corey Harai asks if there will be more accessible housing included in the overhaul.
The short answer is yes, there will be. We are being very intentional about ensuring that these spaces will be open to all. And I should mention as well that in the spring, the Campus Senate adopted a new accessibility statement for the college, which states, and I just pulled it up, that the full participation in Kenyon requires equal access. Accessibility means using the front door literally and metaphorically. And I really love that, especially as we think about how we will be renovating buildings as well as building new ones in order to ensure that, again, everyone has access to these spaces.
Tom, while we're on housing, you touched on it a little bit earlier, but I wonder if from the faculty perspective, you might say a few words about how you think about the role of a residential campus and what it means to have your students living on campus.
Well, I'll say I can't wait to have them back. I think there's, when you don't know what you have until you lose it, right? I think as much as we've been able to make this situation work for so many students, I think we agree that there's no substitute for what it means to live and learn together. I think if you were to hear me in an admissions event, I often say that the Kenyon education is by definition leaky. And what you talk about in the classroom leaks into the hallway, and that leaks into your research, and that leaks into dinner, and that leaks into your into what you talk about in your dormitories. And I think that those experiences, which help us really to tie what we're doing in our physics class to what we're doing in our history class, and also to what other challenges are going on in our lives, having time for that, conversation is something that is very, very hard, maybe impossible to do in this distance model. And I think that when having people on campus, or having all of our students being in a place where they have equal access to a dining hall that doesn't, that has good hours and good tables for conversation, to dormitories that where students, no matter what their background or ability, can all live, and then coming back into the classroom altogether is something that is integral to really making a liberal arts education the creative, problem-solving education that it is. And so we need it. We need them back as soon as possible.
We do. Thank you, Tom.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I'll direct the next question first to you, Sean, but then I would encourage any of my other panelists to weigh in on this one as well. So Pamela Pleasance, class of '83, says, in light of the racial pandemic this country has faced, how has Kenyon thought about becoming an anti-racist community versus being diverse?
And actually, the moving Kenyon towards an anti-racist community has been not only a topic of conversation, but actually really a focal point and something that a topic of action over the course of the past few months. And our work on this year has focused a lot on I'd say universal education and training for all members of the community. So having meaningful education in anti-racism for all of our faculty, for all of our staff, actually for all of our students, and having the goal that this is something that is done on a regular basis, on a scaffolded basis, so that there is kind of progression over the course of time for members of the community is important and essential. And so we have begun the year working on that on a number of fronts, including a group of faculty who spent a week in an in-depth program on equity, justice, and anti-racism. It's called the Kenyon Equity Institute. There were 30 faculty who participated back in August. There's going to be a replay next month in January with another group of 30, and then a group a year, in the summer of this coming year. But we will, there's actually a waiting list and demand for faculty to engage in this work. And the idea is to, to do a work in not only looking at this conceptually from a theoretical level, but doing work in how this impacts what goes on in the classroom and what goes on in terms of being an anti-racist or anti-racist ally within the community. That's been an area of work. I think more importantly, pivoting the community to be able to identify both kind of the regular day-to-day things, but sort of other larger structural systemic issues that come up that we need to work not only to kind of work around, but work to dismantle. And so the education training piece is a first step in getting people to recognize and identify those, and to kind of do some of the individual work that it takes to dismantle that, and then beginning to work more broadly as well. There were some specific concerns we heard from students and recent alums over the summer that we have worked to respond on. One were issues around support for mental health and wellness for students of color, particularly Black students on campus. And we've worked to bring not only some electronic remote resources to students, but we've also been working on continuing to increase the diversity of the Health and Counseling Center. And so we have new counselor that's joining us. And, I think we have a growing racial diversity within the Health and Counseling Center among our counselors, which will be very helpful in addressing some of the requests that came from students. We also created a fund this year and a student, faculty, staff committee to disperse these funds to go to requests from the community on anti-racist, on initiatives that are connected to the college's larger program in anti-racism. And so this is something which I feel very strongly about, that this can't be a top-down effort, that many of the interesting initiatives and ideas actually come from the grassroots up, but are looking for resources to support. And so we've got a program to fund at a level of $50,000 a year for proposals that come up for things that could be speakers or programs or special initiatives or kind of special mechanisms of support, or things that come from the community that can lead to long-term change, and to be able to fund those and get those moving forward. The first round of proposals just came in a few weeks ago, and so we should be right around the beginning of the year announcing kind of what some of the first initiatives coming out of this program look like.
I know we're just about out of time, but this is an important question that I want to make sure I have an opportunity for our other panelists to weigh in as well. So would any of you like to add anything here?
Sure. Briefly, as chair of KFEC, and I'm going to focus in on diverse. I know, Ms. Pleasance, that wasn't specifically your push, but within KFEC, I have made it one of my central concerns to ensure that the pipeline of volunteers, alumni volunteers for Kenyon, not just within KFEC, but within the various alumni groups, is more representative moving forward. I mean, at this moment, we happen to have 2 Black women who are chairs of Alumni Council in KFEC, which is great. But if Camille and I go away in a couple of years and you don't see any others for a while, that's a problem. So we're working very hard to ensure that our pipelines speak to the wealth of diversity that we have in our alumni body.
Thanks so much, Marilyn. If our audience doesn't mind us going slightly over, we do have several questions that relate to enrollment. So before we close out for the evening, Sean, I wonder if you'd like to touch on that, both what the picture looks like for enrollment in general, and as well as specifically for our international students.
Sure, and this is going to be an extremely unusual year for recruitment of students. We have very few traditional visits to campus. We have no large visit days, obviously, no overnight stays on campus, and just a few visitors coming in. We have no direct in-person visits to high schools. Sort of high schools across the country have suspended for obvious reasons, kind of visitors coming in to recruit from campuses. So our admissions office has really pivoted to doing remote sessions both with specific high schools and then remote sessions that are open more broadly to students. It has been in some ways actually an interesting success, in part because we're finding we are reaching students that we actually might not have reached otherwise, because it's easier in some ways for students to connect in. And so that has gone surprisingly well. Early decision numbers and so early decision 1 is wrapping up. The application numbers were actually on par with prior years. Regular decision numbers so far are also running on par with prior years. Interestingly, we have not seen a decrease in international student applications. In fact, the opposite. We're actually, at least in the early decision pool, we saw a bit of an increase in international student applications. So it suggests that some of the challenges and both pandemic related, but also just broader global political related, reflecting international students has not actually impacted interest in Kenyon. And so I at least am optimistic that as we move towards the end of the pandemic and the global travel restrictions begin to relax again, that having international, getting our international students back to campus for those who were away from the country, getting back into the country has been challenging. I think I feel optimistic that that's going to get easier and that our recruitment of new international students will remain strong.
Thank you, Sean. Let me pose one more question to you, and it's an important one. Sylvan Seidemann, class of 65, asks about the ethnic diversity in our new faculty hires this year. He's concerned he didn't think he saw any diversity, but if you could talk a little bit about our hiring.
Yeah, so about a third of our new tenure track faculty sort of identify as people of color. And if we look at both the overall tenure track numbers, about a quarter of our tenure track faculty identify as domestic people of color from the US. That doesn't include some other faculty who are international faculty as well. One of the things that's actually been really quite successful for us over the course of the past 20 years or so has been the Maryland Yarborough Fellowship Program. This was a program that was established about, about exactly 20 years ago or so. And this is where we offer the opportunity for folks who are completing their dissertation, who are committed to enhancing the diversity of a campus community and who have interest in learning about what it's like to teach at a small liberal arts college, have the chance to teach and get a fellowship to also complete their writing and some support to complete their writing. This has been great not only to bring faculty of color to us. Many of the folks who've done Yarborough fellowships, we have recruited into the tenure track faculty positions. But some of these folks also go into tenure track faculty positions at other institutions as well. And so, actually I feel most equally proud of the fact that Kenyon has become a way of introducing sort of very talented scholars of color to teaching at a liberal arts college and giving those folks a credential which helps for positions, whether they're at Kenyon or elsewhere.
Thank you, Sean. Great to see the progress there. So finally, our last question, and it comes from Neely Lynch, class of 07, who asks the perfect final question, which is, what is the best thing I could do to support Kenyon right now as an alum? Sean, you may have an idea, but Marilyn, as chair of KFEC, I suspect you're thinking of something too. So
What could she say? What could she possibly say? No. When I think about the conversation we had last week and the conversation we've had today, I keep hearing conversations about the faculty at Kenyon and how everybody loves the faculty, the small class size. We love historic buildings that we don't want to see torn down. We want to see more accessibility of all of our academic and housing buildings. We want to also make sure they're environmentally friendly and energy efficient. We want to make sure the brightest students are able to come to Kenyon irrespective of their socioeconomic background. And all of that relates to the Kenyon Fund. I mean, we want to talk about our endowment and how to help it grow. Well, let's not spend it down. The Kenyon Fund, if you don't know, actually supports all of the things that I just listed. Your dollars to the Kenyon Fund mean that we don't have to spend down our endowment. So maybe we can catch up to the Grinnells and the Dennisons. I mean, we like a good competition with Dennison, and that's what we do, right? All the things that keep Kenyon are directly tied to the Kenyon Fund. So if you have the means and the ability to support that, continue supporting that. We know it's a very, very difficult time for many right now with the pandemic and the fallout of that. But if you can support the Kenyon Fund, that's how we keep this going. Was that what you wanted me to say, Colleen?
thank you, Marilyn. That was perfect.
Was that it?
So,
Did I hit all my points?
so I'd like to thank you, and I thank all of our panelists for joining us tonight. The time flew by. Thank you to all of our alumni who took the time out of your evenings. I know some of you may be wondering about our plans for reunion weekend, and while we certainly hope to be able to have an in-person reunion weekend, we want to be cautious. So we will plan to wait and make our decision sometime before March, because we know that a lot can change between now and then. So finally, to each of you who has already given to Kenyon in 2020, you were a bright spot for us in this very challenging year. And I thank you and for your past support, your future support, and your continued involvement in this wonderful place. So we'll close our evening by offering you a bit of a sneak peek at the college's holiday video that includes some of our very best holiday memories from over the years. So can we cue the video, please?
In the meadow we can build a snowman and pretend that he is Parson Brown. He'll say, are you married? We'll say, no, man, though you can do the job when you're in town. jingle bell rock. Jingle bells swing and jingle bells ring. Snowing and blowing up bushels of fun. Now the jingle hop has begun. Jingle bell, jingle bell, jingle bell.
Happy holidays, everyone. Thanks for being with us.